welcome to another edition of Kicks Over Coffee, where we have conversations about the industry. I'm your host, Matt Priest. Today, I know you've been plowing through the many videos Andy recorded while we were in New York last week. And my guest today is Gary. And Gary, this is our conversations around inventory. And as I think about our trip to New York last week, we heard a lot of talk around inventory, meaning there's a ton of it now. We've placed all these orders. It's just being dislodged from our supply chain as we speak, and now we have a lot of stuff to sell through. And Target even last week said, hey, we're done ordering stuff for a while because we have a lot of inventory. So as our chief economist, as the mayor of Shoeconomyville, if you will, I wanted to bring you in on a conversation to talk about how we can track inventory, what metrics you're looking at, and why the data is starting to play out to show what we're hearing anecdotally is actually factually correct based on the data that we have.
Absolutely. We've seen a number of reports, not just Target, but a range of other retailers, and not limited to footwear retailers at all, but across the retail spectrum, that are talking about how they maybe missed the boat on their inventory numbers, and they're seeing these dramatic increases in inventories really over the last couple of months, and certainly looking at their year-over-year numbers. Specifically to footwear, the government does not produce a metric of inventory numbers for shoe stores, but a little more broader than that, they do for apparel and accessory stores, which shoe stores are a component of. And looking at these latest numbers produced by the Census Bureau, the inventory to sales ratio had increased to its largest level in a little over a year. In fact, we've seen, as you said, that inventory to sales ratio has gradually grown bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over the last couple of months, and now it's at its highest level in a year. There is a pretty strong correlation over time between the inventory to sales ratio and prices that has an inverse relationship. That is, when the inventory to sales ratio tends to rise, retail prices for footwear tend to fall, and vice versa. Well, with that ratio, like I said, at the highest in a year now, it suggests that deeper into 2022, there's pretty good evidence that these really high footwear prices we're seeing now are likely to begin to ebb a bit lower deeper into this year.
Yeah. So when you think about, I was talking to a shoe executive today, in fact, and we were lamenting that inventory management is an art, not a science. If it was a science, we would have it figured out at this point, where you order the exact amount you need for the consumer at the time. And even to the point where you always go for that last, you're chasing product and you're chasing the hot items, and you go to that last order, and it's kind of that last trip to the Golden Corral buffet. You sit back and you eat, and then you regret that you took that last trip because you've overeaten. And it feels like that's kind of the environment we're in right now. And enough so that analysts, particularly the folks that watch the retail sector on Wall Street, are starting to think about, and retailers seeing much more promotional activity than we've seen over the last year and a half. We've been in an environment where kind of full price is the way to go, right? Because consumers will pay it. But now with so much inventory, again, simple like supply and demand 101, right? A ton of supply, demand that's decreasing based on increased prices. You're gonna see some promotional activity on certain products. And so this shouldn't be a surprise, right? Based on kind of where we find ourselves in the economy today.
Yeah, I would argue that it's not likely to be a surprise, given that supply chain pendulum swing we're talking about, that perhaps the pendulum maybe overswing a bit much given what's going on with consumer spending. In fact, looking at footwear spending the last 2 months, it's really kind of flatlined the last 2 months, looking at the year-over-year percent change. And this has me concerned. We see that the April import numbers were really robust. We saw another double-digit year-over-year increase in footwear imports. Of course, with these imports growing so much faster than consumer spending is growing, of course, that augurs for that build in inventory. Right now, the evidence suggests that, of course, retail footwear prices are up appreciably, and likely to finish the year with perhaps the largest year-over-year increase witnessed in decades. But given that scenario, and certainly we're seeing not only retail prices, but import costs for footwear also are increasing at a pretty good clip. Given that evidence, plotted against prospects for this growing inventory to sales ratio and how that may weigh on retail prices. It has to be concerned for deeper into this year, how that pendulum is likely to swing back, since it's in such an overbought position now, and likely to swing back in the other direction as we work to adjust, accommodate those high inventories we're seeing now.
Yeah, and I think speaking of adjustments, I feel like we've been on a rocking ship during the COVID era that we just can't get to stop rocking. And so as things are rocking back and forth, as the pendulum is swinging back and forth, it's hard to kind of settle it down right now. And it just seems like we're in when we thought we could start to settle things down, it's been difficult to do so with this inflationary pressure. But at the end of the day, the silver line, I think, for at least the consumer, is that just because kind of the flow through of product starts to ebb in one spot, it gets pushed to other channels within our marketplace. So if you think about off-price opportunities in places like Marshalls and TJ Maxx and Ross and Burlington and those types of retailers, they will have access to more product to curate for their customers. So you can see the ability to access product in different channels, maybe at different prices, will emerge based on the availability of inventory. I remember as inventory was hard to find a year ago or so, that many were pointing to those channels saying, they're going to struggle to find product. Well, fast forward a year later, that's not going to be the case for sure. And so my last question for you on this quick hit Kicks Over Coffee, Gary, is what does 23 look like from an inventory perspective? How long does it take for industry to kind of figure things out and right size it appropriately to consumer demand?
It's a great question. I don't know that it's an easily answered one. In fact, in the early days of COVID, a little over 2 years ago, we saw this dramatic build in this inventory to sales ratio, not because of inventories, but because of the collapse in sales. And as we see in the aftermath, kind of in the reverberations of that playing out across the market now, as I said, that pendulum is kind of overswung in one direction as we see it maybe revert back and swing back in the other direction. It's hard to say, since simply because we've never been here before. We've never seen such a dramatic overbuild in inventories because of that collapse in sales. And as we search for that new equilibrium as supply and demand, inventory and sales try to come back into equilibrium with one another, it's hard to say. My guess is looking into 2023, we're likely to see that retrenchment in retail prices, specifically for footwear. I don't think we're likely to see footwear prices go negative, but I do think we're likely to see footwear prices, the year-over-year increase in footwear prices, begin to retreat at a pretty good clip later this year.
Yeah, well, we'll have to wait and see, as we say. And Gary, I appreciate your insights as always. Folks, if you're not a member of FDRA, this is stuff we talk with our members about constantly on our Tuesday membership calls. We always have our proverbial thumb in the wind, tracking which way the shoe economy is trending one way or the other. And so go to FDRA.org to learn more about FDRA. But in the meantime, continue to check out our episodes of Kicks Over Coffee. We now have these cool mugs that actually have our logo on them, not just some random mugs that says, Happy Mother's Day or something to that effect that I pulled out of my cupboard. So anyway, have a great rest of your day. And Gary, thanks again for being on Kicks Over Coffee. I really appreciate it.